There we go. So, we are, the Torah portion this week is VaYeshev. And if you have the Eitz Chaim, we're going to be on page 233. Whatever edition of Chumash you have, we're looking for chapter 38 of Genesis, because that's where I want to, that's what I want to focus on this morning. Chapter 38 of Genesis, which is the fourth Aliyah. And somebody else coming in. Go. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Again, page 233 in the Eitz Chaim, chapter 38 of Genesis, the fourth Aliyah of VaYeshev. I'll say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So what I've been doing the past few weeks is focusing on the challenging sections of the portions, those sections that were skipped over in my day school education, because in elementary school and day school, one learns the book of Genesis, the portions in the book of Genesis, but you can understand why the story of Lot and his daughters would not have been taught, and or the rape of Dinah would not have been taught, and why this story would not have been taught either. So it is assumed that people will learn the story later in life. So even in shul, not all shuls read the entire portion every week. Our shul does, but most conservative synagogues in the country do not read the full portion. So perhaps once every 3 years, this section is read, and then even if it's read, it's not really focused on. But I wanted, since we have Torah study class, why not focus on it and see why it's even in the Torah? Because one of the essential elements of the Torah is that everything in it serves a religious purpose. And there is supposed to be deeper spiritual meaning in all of the sections of the Torah. So when we come up to a section like this, we have to always be asking ourselves, what is the deeper spiritual meaning here? Or perhaps the historical significance, or perhaps the prophetic foreshadowing that for the story to be included in the Torah. So now we have to understand our context, that the pages before we are introduced to Joseph. So the portion begins on 226 in the Eitz Chaim, chapter 37, verse 1, and actually from chapter 37 until the end of the Torah, until the end of Genesis, which is chapter 50, we're focused on Joseph. So the fourth generation, we have Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Rachel and Leah. Now we're focused on Joseph. And we're introduced to Joseph and his dreams, and how he has antagonized his brothers. And Jacob sends Joseph, after Joseph shares dreams with his brothers and his father, Jacob then sends Joseph to look for the brothers who are shepherding the flocks. Joseph finds them, and the brothers see Joseph approaching from a distance and suggest either killing Joseph, throwing him in a pit, or selling him to a passing caravan. So it is Reuben, the brothers want to kill him. Reuben, the oldest brother, says, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. And Judah is the one who suggests selling him to the caravan. So it's significant, Reuben and Judah, Reuben being the oldest. So there's always this sense throughout the Torah and the Bible that there's something special about the firstborn son. So that's why Reuben has to have a focus in the story. And Judah, we are Jews. This is Judaism, named for Judah. So Judah is significant in the story as well. So that's why Judah plays a role and suggests selling Joseph into slavery, into the caravan, where he ends up being sold to Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and Pharaoh's chief steward, as the last verse of chapter 37 says, right there on 233. So now we digress and get to this story here on chapter 38. So again, we're on page 233 in Eitz Chaim, chapter 38 of Genesis, whatever edition of Chumash you're using. Vayehi ba'et hahi. Translated here, about that time. Okay? Vayehi ba'et hahi. So around that time, Vayered Yehuda me'et echav, vayet ad ish adulami ushemo chira. So Judah goes down from his brothers. That's literal translation. Of course, that doesn't make sense. So that's why it says in our English, Judah left his brothers. Vayet ad ish adulami. He camped, right? Vayet means to pitch a tent. So he camped near a certain Adulamite. So Adulamite, the commentary here says a man of the city of Adulam, which is in the northern sector of the Judean lowland, about 9 miles northeast of modern Beit Guvrin. That helps a lot. I'm being sarcastic. Beit Guvrin, though, if you've been to Israel on organized tours, you may have then, and if it's a family trip especially that you were on, you may have done digging, archaeological digs for Israel. So one of their places they have is in Beit Guvrin, where you go underground into these caves and you dig there. So that's Beit Guvrin. So that's southwest of Jerusalem. And it is in the lowland. So if you can picture the geography of Israel, you descend from Jerusalem on your way to Tel Aviv. You're going through what was ancient Judea. So south of that is where this is, okay? So just picture the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, and you picture south of the highway, somewhere in that area is Adulam. Okay, so Judah meets an Adulamite named Chira. Verse 2. Vayar Sham Yehuda bat ish Kinaani ushemo Shua vayikacheha vayavo eleha. So Judah saw there a daughter of a Canaanite man, and his name is Shua. The Canaanite man's name is Shua, and he takes his daughter and approaches her, would be the literal translation, but in this context, the taking is marrying, and in ancient times, taking possession of a woman is the equivalent of marriage. So he takes possession of her and consummates the marriage with her. Okay, so that's what the Vayavo Eleha means, as it says here, cohabited with her. Okay, so just to pause here for a second, we've known from previous generations, Abraham insists with his chief servant Eliezer not to have a Canaanite woman be the wife of Abraham's son Isaac. Isaac insists with Jacob not to marry a Canaanite woman. And here, Judah, again, we observe Judaism. We are Jews, named for Judah. And here, Judah is marrying a Canaanite woman, bucking the trend of the what is the preferred woman for the preferred people in the generations, right? Esau marries a Canaanite woman, but who cares about Esau? We care about his twin brother Jacob. So Isaac finds a wife. Eliezer finds a wife for him in the home country from a cousin. Jacob gets wives from his cousins, but Judah has a Canaanite woman. Okay, so it's important for us to understand our history that we are descended from a Canaanite woman. Okay, so that's very important for us to know that we are descended from a Canaanite woman. And I'll get to that, hopefully by the end of the story, to know how the line goes from Judah, the descendants. So verse 3, so he marries her, consummates the marriage. Vatahar vateled bain, she conceived and gives birth to a son. Vayikra et shemo Er, and they called him Er. Vatahar od, she conceived again, vateled bain, and gives birth to a son. Vatikra et shemo Onan, so his name is Onan. Vatosef od vateled bain, she additionally gives birth to another son. Vatikra et shemo Shelah, and his name was Shelah. Vahaya bichziv belidata oto, and they were in Keziv, wherever that town is. And it doesn't matter what the commentary says, because it's not going to help us. So they were in Keziv when she gives birth to him. So there's Er, Onan, and Shelah, three sons that Judah and this unnamed Canaanite woman have together. 6. Vayikach Yehuda isha le'er bechoro. So time is passed, and Er has grown up, and Judah finds a wife for Er, his firstborn son, Ushama Tamar. She's named, and her name is Tamar. Okay, Tamar becomes a popular name in modern Israel. So it's just fascinating that there's a Tamar in this story, and we'll see how independent and strong a woman she is. And there's a Tamar in the King David stories as well, later in the Bible. Verse 7, Vayehi Er b'chor Yehuda, and so it was that Er, the oldest son of Judah, Ra be'enei Adonai, was evil in the eyes of God. How? What did Er do? We have no idea. The Torah decides that it's not worth it to share that story. Why it's not shared, we don't know, but so evil in the eyes of God, Vayemitehu Adonai, God kills him. Again, why? We don't know. It says the Lord took his life. Okay, God killed him. And so Er is dead, Tamar is a widow. Vayomer Yehuda, verse 8, Leonan, Bo el eshet achicha, v'yabem ota, v'hakem zera le'achicha. Judah says to Onan, the second son, go, take Tamar, take the woman who is the wife of your dead brother, take her as your wife, v'yabem ota. So it's not translated well here. Yibum is the noun, yabem is the verb, for performing the levirate marriage. Okay, that's the best way I can translate this. It's a Jewish concept based on this right here. That and there's a whole tractate in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, called Yevamot, the plural of this, dealing with all the details and logistics of how this is done. So a couple is married, the husband dies before the couple has a child together. The widow is forced, no, the widow is obligated to marry the dead husband's brother, even if the dead husband is married already, because in Torah law and ancient rabbinic law, a man is allowed to have more than one wife. So even if that brother is married already, the widow marries that brother and has and they're supposed to have a child together in that marriage, and that child becomes the heir of the dead brother. Okay, so in other words, if I am the brother that marries the woman, my son through her is not considered my son. It would be the dead brother's son. And the purpose of this is all about inheritance, and especially land holdings, so that dead brother can still, that line for that dead brother can continue on into a next generation. The woman has a choice, and she could refuse to marry the dead brother. And if she does that, then or the husband, the dead brother, the brother of the deceased could also refuse to marry the woman. Then they perform what's called chalitza, where the sandal is taken off his foot, and she spits in his face. I would have thought that this is a ceremony that doesn't happen anymore, but I've said this in other contexts. My daughter Eliza has a very good friend whose brother tragically died of brain cancer. And that brother was married, like he developed brain cancer a year after their marriage. The brother died last year. Of Eliza's friend. Her brother died. The woman is left a widow, and she has to perform a chalitza in order to get married again. She doesn't want to marry the brother. She has to perform chalitza. So they belong to an Orthodox synagogue, a modern Orthodox synagogue in Westchester County in New York, and the rabbi says that so in 2021, chalitza is still performed. Okay, it sounds bizarre. It sounds, I don't know what, it sounds emotionally awful, but it's still done today. So in Torah context, 3,000 years ago, okay, society was different then, so we can handle it. But to understand that it happens today, that's bizarre to me when I heard from my Eliza that this is what the widow is going to need to do. Okay, so the second brother, Judah tells his son Onan, marry Tamar, and that way v'hakem zera le'achicha, and provide offspring for your brother. Okay, so again, this is the first we're hearing of this in the Torah. It becomes Jewish law based on this story right here. Just, okay, verse 9. Vayeda Onan knew, ki lo yiyeh hazara. It sounds better in Hebrew, more poetic. Lo. It will, that the child, the zera, the child, the product of the relationship would not be his. Lo, would not be his. So v'haya imba el eshet achiv v'shichet arza. So it came when he cohabited with his brother's wife. V'shichet arza levilti natan zera la'achiv. He would waste that cohabitation by spilling to the ground, so that there would not have been, to prevent a product from being produced for his brother. I'm being PG here in my translation here. You get the idea, and look up the word onanism, and it's based on Onan right here, this boy. Okay, not boy, this man. Okay, so this is what Onan did. This this child is not going to be considered mine. Well, I'm going to make sure there's not going to be a child. Okay, so then what happens? Verse 10, Vayera be'enei Adonai asher asa. This, what he did was found evil in the eyes of God, Vayamet gamoto, and God killed him too. Okay, so God has killed Er, and God now has killed Onan. Okay, the God killing these men is not the point of this story being here in the Torah, even though it's difficult for us to read this. And certainly in the eyes of the narrator, it's understood that God has killed them. Certainly they died, right? It's our perspective. And I like to add this. So the tradition is that God wrote the Torah. So if God wrote the Torah, and then God can say that God killed these men, right? But most non-Orthodox people today in the Jewish community do not believe that God literally wrote the Torah. We might believe that the Torah is divinely inspired. People with a particular prophetic vision wrote the Torah, or that there were oral traditions that passed down over the centuries that were edited, perhaps in the time of King David, perhaps in the time of the exile to Babylonia, we're not sure when, that they were edited into the form of the Bible as we know it, or at least the Torah as we have it. So if they are human stories, the human stories reflect the idea of God's role in the world and God's intervention in individual life. So the death of these two sons of Judah are understood by the Torah to be caused by God. And we, as people today, can understand events in our life as being directed by God. Sometimes we see that, and God forbid, in times of tragedy, we cry out to God, why God did you do this to me? And objectively speaking, my belief is that God doesn't do these things to people. God doesn't cause good things to happen. God doesn't cause bad things to happen. But for the Torah, God caused Er and Onan to die because evil that they did. The evil is described by Onan of what Onan did, what Onan did, but nothing is described of what Er did. Okay, so now the story, and feel free to interrupt with a question or a comment at any point. Unmute yourself, but we continue. Verse 11. Vayomer Yehuda leTamar. Judah said to Tamar. So now there's one brother left, Shelah. So Vayomer Yehuda leTamar kalato. Judah says to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Shavi almana, sit as a widow, Beit Avich, in your father's house, because that's what happens. In the ancient Near East, a woman is supported either by her father or her husband. Has no husband, she has to go back to her. And no, if she has children and she becomes a widow, then the children support her. But if she has no children and she's a widow, then she has to go back to her father's house and beg for mercy and compassion by her father to continue to be supported by him. So Judah says, go back to your father, sit as a widow, and be supported by your father. Ad yigdal Shelah v'ni, until Shelah, my son, grows up. Ki amar pen yamut gamhu ke'echav, because for he thought he too might die like his brothers. Right? Instead of giving him over now, the Torah is suggesting here with this parenthetical comment, hang out for some time in your father's house while I get my head around the fact that two of my sons have died. Vatelech Tamar vateshev beit aviha. So Tamar goes and sits in her father's house or lives with her father. Okay. Vayirbu hayamim. the days a long time afterward, right? So we don't know how long, but time has passed, more than a reasonable amount of time to sit waiting for Shelah to grow up, or for Judah to get his head around the fact that it's time for Shelah to marry, and we'll take our chances here, see if Shelah stays alive. Okay, so time is wasting. Tamar is getting older. But Tamat bat Shua Eshet Yehuda, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, again, not named, only his father-in-law is named. So Judah's wife dies. Vayinachem Yehuda, Judah is comforted. Vaya'al al gozazei tsono. So whatever, as the English says, Judah goes through a mourning period for the death of his wife, and then he goes, Vaya'al al gozazei tsono hu v'chira re'ehu ha'adulami timnata. So he and his friend Chira, right? We remember back in verse 1 that he met Chira the Adulamite. So he and Chira, his friend, go to where the sheep shearers are in Timnah. Okay, so we don't know where Timnah is. We know it says in the commentary it's west of Beit Shemesh, but there's another Timnah down near Eilat. So who knows? It makes sense that he's staying around that area. So there's a Timnah there too. Okay, so he goes to where the sheep shearers are. So it's a big festival, the sheep shearing time. I don't know, every now and then on my YouTube feed, somebody shearing sheep comes up, a video of sheep shearing. I have no idea why YouTube does this to me and comes up with bizarre videos that it thinks I might like to watch. But when sheep shearing happens, it's a season. So people bring their sheep to where the sheep shearers are. So it's a big festival. 13. Vayugad Tamar lemor. So Tamar found out. Hine chamich ole timnata lagos sono. Here, your father-in-law has gone to Timnah to shear his sheep. Vatasar bigdei almanuta. So she has an idea. So she takes off her widow garment, me'aleha, from on her. Vatechas b'tsaif vatit alaf. So she gets covered. She covers herself with a veil, and vatit alaf. Vatechas b'tsaif vatit alaf. The English says covered her face with a veil and wrapping herself up. Okay, so she's completely covered. Vateshev befetach einayim. She sits at the crossroads, or the entrance to Einayim, whatever. So she sits in a prominent place in front of the town of Einayim. Asher al derech tinata, which is on the road to Timnah. Ki ra'ata ki gadal Shelah, because she saw that Shelah's gotten older. Vehi lo nitna lo leisha, and she wasn't given him as a wife. So she has this plan. She's wrapped up. She has her widow. She takes off her widow's garb. She wraps herself up in other garments and sits at the entrance to Einayim, which is on the road to Timnah, because she's waiting to meet Judah. Because Shelah, it's time for Shelah to be given to her as a husband. 15. Vayir eha Yehuda. Judah sees her. Vayachsheveha lezonah. And he thought her to be a prostitute. Now, the thing we have to ask, he sees her. The narrator is talking. So we know that he sees Tamar. The question is, does he know it's Tamar? He thought her to be a prostitute. So perhaps he doesn't know. But I think the Hebrew is ambiguous here, because Isaac's eyes were dimmed and he saw Jacob and Esau come in, but did he really recognize and know what was going on? We're not sure. The story was ambiguous back then. Here, does he know it's Tamar dressed up as a prostitute? Or yes, Sylvia, unmute yourself. Yes, Sylvia.
But it does say in the description that she's wearing a veil.
Right. So, right, which is why he thinks she's a prostitute, because her
Right.
face is
But he
covered.
doesn't recognize her.
Okay, yes, I'm just saying that the Hebrew is ambiguous. Perhaps he recognizes her, perhaps he doesn't, perhaps he knows it's Tamar, perhaps he doesn't. If he knows it's Tamar and still does what he's about to do, that raises major questions. Why is he doing this with his daughter-in-law? If he doesn't know who it is, that she's covered up like this, all right, but still, he does what he does with her. You'd think he'd recognize her. Okay, you'll see. So whatever, it's questionable behavior to say the least, if not immoral behavior on Judah's part. You'll have to excuse me. I'm at home and my front door just rang. So I'll be right back. Coming. Okay, sorry about that. Contractor coming in to do or whatever. So the Judah recognizing Tamar or not. Okay, but she's dressed like a prostitute, so he's taking advantage of the fact of how she's dressed to do what he's about to do. Okay, so it's questionable behavior, like I said, to say the least, about what Judah is doing here. Vayet eleha el haderach, 16. So he turned aside to her by the road. Vayomer havana avo elayich. How about, like he makes a proposition? How about if we the avo, lavo here is like Judah approaching the daughter of Shelah. It's that kind of approaching. How about we approach together, okay? Ki lo yada ki chalatohi, because he didn't know she was his daughter-in-law. At least that's what the narrator is saying. Vatomer, so she says, Mati tainli ki tavo elai. What are you going to pay me for approaching me? And verse 17, Vayomer, he says, Anochi ashalach yedi izim minatzon. I'll send you a kid from my flock. Vatomer im titene ravon ad shalchecha. And she says, well, give me collateral until, or a pledge, leave a pledge until the kid arrives. You know, it's one thing for you to promise me a kid. It's how do I know you're actually going to send it? You can have your way with me, and then I'll never see you again. So give me a promise that you're going to pay me. So 18, he says, Vayomer ma ha'eravon asher etein lach. What kind of pledge do you want from me? Vatomer, she says, Chotamcha ufetilecha umatcha asher beyadecha. I want the seal, the cord, and the staff in your hand. Vayitein la, vayavo eleha, vatahar lo. So he gives it to her. He approaches her, or has his way with her. Vatahar lo, and she conceived. Okay, so the seal and the cord and the staff. The seal and the cord, if you look at the commentary below, it explains that the seal was a hollow cylinder and it was like a necklace to go through it. So you wear, and in signing documents in ancient times, you'd seal it with wax or whatever with your own personal seal. So this is his his personal signature, identifying to Judah himself. Okay, so it was Judah's personal stamp that was unique to Judah. Okay, so with that one time, well, what actually we don't know it's one time. From the story, it's one time, but so one time she conceives. 19, Vatakom Vatelech, she gets up and goes. Vatasar Tzifame Aleha, she takes off the wrap around her. Vatil Bash big day almenuta, and she puts back on her widow's garment. Okay, but she still has Judah's stuff. Vayishlach Yehuda at Gedi Ha'izim, Judah is good with the promise and sends the kid from the flock. Biyad Re'ehu, kid, meaning baby goat, of course. Biyad Re'ehu Adulami, with his friend the Adulamite. Lakacha ta'eravon miyad ha'isha velo metza'ah. So he sends the goat in order with the friend in order to get the pledge back. He needs his seal, cord, and staff. So he sends the friend to that woman, but the friend didn't find her. Lo metza'ah. Vayishal et anshe makoma lemor. And he asked the people of the place, saying, Ayeh hakedesha hi va'inayim al hadarech. Where is the prostitute who was sitting in Einayim on the road? Vayomru, they said, Lo hayata bazeh kedesha. We know of no such prostitute. There's no such woman sitting there. Vayashal ve'el Yehudai came back to Judah, the friend. Vayomer, and he said, Lo mitzati, I didn't find her. V'gam anshe hamakom amru, and also the people of the place said, Lo hayata vazeh kedesha. There was never such a woman in that place. There was never such a prostitute. Vayomer Yehuda, 23, Judah says, Tikachla penniyelavuz. Let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. Right. So now what's he going to do? How is he going to find this woman? It's going to be clear that Judah has slept with a prostitute, which might not be so unusual for men to do that at that time, but still, the story he would say, hey, I left something with a woman. If you go around, then Judah's reputation is questioned, and he doesn't want that to happen. Okay, let's leave the seal, the cord, and the staff. I don't want to be a laughing stock, or I don't want to be degraded. I sent the goat. You didn't find her. I did my due diligence. We did our best. Now, okay. Vayehi kemi shlosh chodashim. So 3 months pass. Vayugad lehuda lemor zanta tamar kalatecha. So she starts to show, and people are saying to Judah, your daughter-in-law Tamar became a prostitute, or has done prostitute-like things. V'gam hinei hara liz nunim. She became pregnant through prostitution. Vayomer Yehuda, Judah said, Hotziuha batisaref. Bring her out, and we're going to burn her. Okay, we're going to burn her to death. Later on in rabbinic literature, there are methods of execution for different capital crimes. Adultery would be burning, based on this story. Okay, so again, that's a topic for another time about methods of execution according to Jewish law. Just know that according to the rabbis, the Sanhedrin never had the power to execute anyone. It was all in theory anyway. And they even said a Sanhedrin that would execute one person in 70 years would be a bloody court. So they talked about it, they interpreted the law about it, but they never did anything about it. But again, the idea that execution for adultery would be burning is from this story. Okay, so he mutzeit, she's brought out. V'hi shalcha et chamiha lemor, but she sends a message to her father-in-law. Leish asher elelo, whichever man these belong to Anochi Hara. I became pregnant through him. Okay, so she's, again, her strength and her cleverness comes out here in the story. Okay, I'll come out, but remember, I got these pledges here. So whoever owns these pledges, that's who made me pregnant. Vatomer hakerna, and she said, see if you recognize them. Lemi hachotemet, v'hapatilim, v'hamateh ha'ela. Who is the owner of the seal, cord, and staff? Vayaker Yehuda, verse 26. Judah recognized it. Vayomer tzadka mimeni. And he said, so the English says here, she is more in the right than I am. Or it's more than outwitted. She has out-justified me. So the word tzedek is justice. It's also, of course, tzedakah, charity, but tzedakah is justice. She out-justed me. She was more just than I. Ki alkein lo netatiha leshelah v'ni, because I did not give her Shelah, my son. V'lo yasaf od leda'ata, and he was not intimate with her again. But why would he? He knows that she's his daughter-in-law. Why would he even consider sleeping with her again? Why would it even be permissible for him to do that? So why would the Torah even say that? So that's just a question that's just left unanswered there. V'lo yasaf od leda'ata. He was not intimate with her again. Okay, so now the key part for the story, because we don't have that much time left, is these last verses, is the genealogy, that the produce of Judah and Tamar here is that she gives birth. So when the time for birth was approaching, she's pregnant with twins. She doesn't know that until they're about to be born. During labor, vayitein yad, one puts the hand forth. Vatikach hamiyaledet, the midwife takes vatikshor al yado shani. She wraps she ties a scarlet thread around that hand that burst forth. Lamor saying ze yatsa rishona, kind of like a tag to see who to say that this one was born first. Vayehi meshiv yado, but the baby brings the hand back. Vehine yatsa achiv, but his brother came out first. Vatomer ma paratzta alecha paretz. How dare you burst forth like this in this bursting forth way? Vayikra shemo paretz, and his name was Paretz. Well, Paretz grammatically here, because sometimes the 3-dot vowel becomes the T vowel. The segol becomes a kamatz when it's the last word in the line. So otherwise it's pronounced Peretz. Okay, but when it's grammatically speaking, when it's the last word in a sentence for the Torah, it becomes Paretz. Okay, so just, I'm sure my father can give a lecture about biblical grammar, but we're not going to call on my father to do that. It's not necessary. I just want to point this out, that his name is Peretz, but sometimes it's pronounced Paretz. V'achar yatsa achiv, and then after that, his brother was born, Asher al yado hashani, the one who had the scarlet thread around his hand, vayikra shemo Zarach, or Zerach. Again, otherwise it would be Zerach. So his name was Zerach, like sunrise is Zericha. So Peretz and Zerach are born of this illicit relationship. Now, that's how the story ends, because then in chapter 39, we're back to Joseph down in Egypt. Okay, so why is this story here? because, and we ask this question because we are Jews again. It is Judaism that is our religion. We're named for Judah. It's bizarre that an origin story about who we are as a people is this X-rated story. Judah and Tamar, this relationship to be who we are as a people, right? Of the 12 tribes of Israel, only 2 tribes are left after the temple is destroyed. Well, only 2 tribes are left by the time of the Babylonian exile 2,500 years ago. The tribe of Levi, so anybody who's a Kohen or a Levi is from the tribe of Levi. And then the rest of us, whether when you convert to Judaism, you automatically become part of the tribe of Judah, or you're born a Jew from the tribe of Judah. That's it. Those are the only 2 tribes left. So this is our story, our origin story. Now, I say that because you would think of other origin stories of other people in the world, you have a more glamorous kind of story of where we came from, right? So this one is bizarre. Now, to add to the bizarre nature of the story is the fact of the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth, remember, Ruth is at the end of the book of Ruth. It's a 4-chapter book. We're given the genealogy. Ruth marries Boaz. Read the story to find out how they marry. Their great-grandson is King David. Boaz, it says in that genealogy, is descended from Peretz. The genealogy goes back in the book of Ruth to say he's the son. He's descended from Peretz. He's descended from Judah and Peretz down to Boaz. Boaz, okay, marries Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite. We know from the Torah we're not allowed to marry a Moabite. So how do we get around that? A Jewish man can marry a Moabite woman, but a Jewish woman cannot marry a Moabite man. That's how the rabbis get around it, because Boaz marries Ruth, and King David is from that relationship. So how could King David be an illicit king? Can't be. So the law changed to say Jewish men can marry Moabite women, but not vice versa. Okay, so she's a Moabite. And and remember, a couple portions ago, how was Moab born? Moab is the son of Lot and one of his daughters in the cave after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. So Lot is drunk, sleeps with his daughters. One of them gives birth to Ammon, a nation on the other side of the Jordan, and the other one gives birth to Moab. So Moab is a child of an illicit relationship, and the descendant of Moab is Ruth. Peretz is a child of an illicit relationship, and the descendant is Boaz. Boaz, a child of a descendant of an illicit relationship, marries a woman who is a child of a descendant of an illicit relationship. The 2 of them together have a child and they become the great-grandfather of King David, and the future Messiah is a descendant of King David. Now, we have 11 minutes left, and this race. So I first became aware of this. I mean, you kind of know this, but you don't really think about it until you take a Bible class in rabbinical school with a Bible professor. So Professor Ed Greenstein, who's now of Bar-Ilan University, or maybe even retired from there, taught us this in class, and kind of blew our minds. Like, wait a second, really? King David, the greatest king of Israel, is descended from 2 illicit relationships. And Jews altogether are a byproduct of an illicit relationship. And the future Messiah is descended from an illicit relationship. Why? Any thoughts? Why? Jan.
So maybe it's to give us hope that since we may not be perfect and may not do everything right, here are folks that, had their whatevers, had their challenges, maybe didn't do everything right, but were able to kind of spin things around and work towards a better outcome and a better ending, maybe to give us hope that even if we make mistakes, we can still hopefully eventually arrive at a better outcome and
Okay.
good things ahead.
So yes, so Jan, I totally agree with that. And certainly that's an attitude that the Torah has, that no matter our background, we can rise above it and become great. So the Torah has that attitude in the book of Deuteronomy that everybody was at Mount Sinai. Everybody heard the Torah from the wood chopper to the water drawer. It wasn't just the wealthy. It wasn't just the people with status, and anybody and everybody in the community has to be treated equally, right? So absolutely. And then also we know from the stories that we've been reading in Genesis that the founding fathers and mothers of our people are not perfect people, to say the least. So there's that. There's also the bigger question, the bigger issue that I think related to this, Jan, is the idea that the Messiah is not a perfect person. So in other words, the Messiah is not a person that is on the pedestal, that has been groomed from the beginning with perfect birth. Okay, now, what comes to mind, of course, is another religion and how Jesus is portrayed there, right? So you have Mary set aside, and you have a virgin birth of Jesus. So is that story, all the followers of Jesus, all the people who wrote those stories were all Jewish. Were they writing these stories as a contrast to this story in the Torah? Like were the people 2,000 years ago at the time of Jesus embarrassed to say that we Jews are descended from this illicit relationship? Wouldn't it be nice to have a story about someone who comes from perfect birth, in fact, virgin birth, if not impregnated by God? Shouldn't that be the story of the Messiah? So perhaps there's some element of that here in stark contrast to Jesus is our story of the Jewish people. That total opposite of virgin birth is who we are as a people. And that despite this illicit, immoral, unethical history to our people, we managed to create the Torah and live a life of Torah. Isn't that perhaps what we're teaching, that a more realistic message that anybody then can live a life of Torah? As opposed to, I'll never be able to say that I am a product of virgin birth. No one can ever say that. So who can ever live up to that ideal, right? So perhaps then this story, especially in the time of the rabbis, takes on that extra significance. So we'll end, just leave it there for people to further mull over. We'll end here for today. I hope everybody, thanks to Jules there and Judy his daughter, for that beautiful background to kind of give us the message. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And also happy Hanukkah this coming Sunday evening. So please, I hope you have joyous and meaningful holidays, and we'll see you next Wednesday during Hanukkah. Have
Happy
a good rest of the
Hanukkah,
day.
everybody.
Take care.
Happy Hanukkah to all. Yeah, Shakar.
Thank
Bye.
you, you too.
Be well, everyone.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving to all.